Okay, hi everyone. Good evening. Okay, so good evening again and welcome to the Appellate Division First Department. I am Bahati Pitt Burke, Associate Justice of this court and Chair of this court's Anti-Bias Committee and the Justice Forward Committee. And I welcome you tonight to our program, A Spotlight on Moving Justice Forward, the LGBTQ plus community in the law and the judiciary. Our presiding justice, Diane T. Renwick, was unable to be here today, but she extends a warm welcome to the panelists and all of the attendees of this program, both here and in person and online. The Justice Forward initiative was created by Presiding Justice Renwick to promote programs such as this and to engage young people with our legal system, in particular the state court system and the judiciary. Tonight's event is part of a series of programs under the First Department's Justice Forward initiative. Our first program in February, A Spotlight on Moving Justice Forward, Black Men in the Law and Judiciary, celebrated Black History Month and highlighted issues surrounding how to increase the representation of Black men in the law and the judiciary. Our second program, a Spotlight on Moving Justice Forward, I hope you see a theme there, Women in the Law and the Judiciary celebrated Women's History Month by bringing together notable women in our legal system to discuss their paths to the bench and the issues unique to being a woman blazing their trails through the legal profession. In May, we celebrated Law Day, which brought high school students from various Bronx and Manhattan high schools to AD1 for a full day of panel discussions on careers in the courts, viewing an oral argument, and allowing students to put themselves in the position of the justice of the court. And we also had an art contest, and if you went to the meet and greet, you might have seen some of the artwork downstairs on the wall, the first, second, and third place winners, as well as the 10 honorable mentions. So we've been busy. And tonight, our mission to move justice forward continues. In this program celebrating Pride Month, judges, lawyers, and other people from the LGBTQ plus community will share their own personal experiences being out, their perspectives on the community's needs relative to the court system, and their insight as to the organizational challenges that the community faces in getting more of its members into the legal profession and public service, and ultimately onto the bench. So as we progress through this series, I know that it's become increasingly apparent that I don't want to take up your valuable time with much more of a speech. I want to get straight to the panel, but I do have to make certain acknowledgments. I will start with the justices of this court who are in attendance, and I'll announce them in seniority order because that's how we do everything around here. And so we have the Honorable Tanya R. Kennedy and the Honorable Kelly O'Neill Levy. We also have Administrative Judge of the civil term of the New York State Supreme Court, Adam Silvera. And Dominic Napolitano, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, the incoming president of the State Bar. Oh, president as of Saturday. Look how time flies. Congratulations. So I'd like to also thank Adam Horowitz, AD1's Director of Special Projects, who does really all of the heavy lifting when it comes to putting on these programs. I'd like to thank Eric Ho, our Senior Technical Manager, and his team, including Kali, who's here with us today from our IT department, Natalie Ramirez, Administrative Assistant to the Presiding Justice, as well as other invaluable members of our court family, Susanna Rojas, Clerk of the Court, Chief Anthony Covello, Lieutenant Gil Sanchez, and all of our court officers, as well as the engineers and other support staff. And so to get to the panel of speakers, we have with us here today the Honorable Jim Heyer, Justice of the Supreme Court, Westchester County. The Honorable Matthew Parker Rasso, Supervising Judge, Civil Court, Bronx County. The Honorable Norma Jean Jennings, Supervising Judge, Housing Court, New York County. Charlie Arrowood, Esquire, Senior Counsel, the Richard C. Failer LGBTQ Commission of the New York State Courts. Nadia Swanson, Director of Technical Assistance and Advocacy, the Ali Forney Center, as well as our own Alan Gray, who is a principal court attorney here and the author of the mission statement that I read a little bit earlier on for this program. So I'll turn the program over to him, and I hope you enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Pitt Burke, and good evening, everyone. Happy Pride. You can all say it, it's okay, Happy Pride. I was speaking earlier with the Justice. I'm fairly certain we are the first New York State Court's Pride event for 2024, so I'm very excited to have all of you with us here tonight for that. And I especially want to just reiterate my thanks to Presiding Justice Renwick for letting me run with this program. I often feel like I work here in clown shoes just because of the brilliance and fantastic work that our justices do, and for her to entrust me with this program was a great honor, and I'm very grateful to be able to share with you this conversation that we've worked to prepare today. I'll begin by just telling you a little bit more about each of our panelists, and I'll start to my immediate right. Justice James L. Heyer is a Supreme Court Justice in the 9th Judicial District, and it's designated to Westchester County. He's also the chairman of the 9th Judicial District's Access to Justice Committee and a commissioner on the Richard C. Fela LGBTQ Commission of the New York State Court System. He is a member of the Board of Visitors of Pace University's Elizabeth Haub School of Law and was previously an administrative law judge for the Westchester County Human Rights Commission. Justice Heyer is also a past president of the Westchester County Bar Association and chair of its Law Day Committee, its Public Service Committee, Awards Committee, and he was also a hearings officer for the Grievance Committee. Justice Heyer is a member of the New York State Bar Association, where he served on the House of Delegates, its nominating committee, its task force on incarceration release planning and programs, and serves as a New York Bar Foundation Fellow. He was also awarded a New York State Commendation for Human Rights, for Human Rights Advocacy, and the Pace Law School Leading Attorney Under 40 Award, together with the Westchester Bar Association's Leadership Award, the LGBT Bar Association of New York's Community Excellence Award, and the Westchester Residential Opportunities Human Rights Champion Award. His bachelor's is in political science from Ramapo College of New Jersey, and his Juris Doctor and Environmental Law certificate are from Pace Law School. Justice, thank you so much for being with us tonight. To his immediate right is Nadia Swanson. They are the Director of Technical Assistance and Advocacy at the Ali Forney Center, overseeing AFC's International Model Replication Program of over 75 programs around the world. Nadia is on the Advisory Council of Equality New York. They've been doing grassroots and nonprofit advocacy and clinical services for 15 years in support of LGBTQ+, immigrant, youth homelessness, sex worker, and BIPOC rights. One of their proudest recent accomplishments is passing a bill allowing runaway and homeless minors in New York the ability to consent to their own medical care. They've completed clinical training at the Ackerman Institute, were an adjunct professor at Silberman School of Social Work, and their past experience includes the Callan Lord Community Health Center, the SCO Family of Services, and the American Friends Service Committee Immigrant Rights Program, among others. Nadia, thank you so much for being with us tonight. To her right is the Honorable Matthew Parker Rasso, who, as Justice Pitt Burke mentioned, is the supervising judge of the Civil Court for Bronx County. Judge Parker Rasso was elected to Civil Court in November of 2019. His first year on the bench was in New York County, and he returned to his home borough of the Bronx in 2021. In January of last year, he was designated an acting justice of the Supreme Court and appointed to his current position as supervising judge of the Civil Court, Bronx County. Before being elected, the judge was a senior court attorney to a civil court judge and then principal law clerk to a Supreme Court justice, both in Bronx County. Before joining the court system, Judge Parker Rasso was in private practice as an associate attorney at 2 boutique New York City law firms specializing in civil litigation, commercial transactions, and criminal defense. And his Juris Doctor is from New York Law School. His bachelor's in philosophy, politics, and law is from SUNY Binghamton. Judge, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I should also mention that I think it's the next Pride Month event, at least within the First Department. Judge Parker Rasso will be hosting in the Bronx this Thursday at 851 Grand Concourse at 12:45, and that is a program entitled Reflect, Empower, Unite, an Equal Justice, Gender Fairness, and Anti-Bias LGBTQ+ Pride event. So I hope that everyone watching, if you're not able to go in person, you certainly, I believe that program's also live streamed, so hopefully you can tune in on the live stream. And if you do, you'll also see our next two panelists who are also here with us tonight. The Honorable Norma J. Jennings is a supervising judge of New York County Housing Court. She was appointed to the bench by Chief Administrative Judge Lawrence Marks in 2019. Judge Jennings received her bachelor's from Montclair State University, her law degree from Columbia Law School, and a master's in history from the City College of New York. Prior to her appointment to the bench, Judge Jennings was a court attorney within the state court system. Her legal career also includes serving as a staff attorney at Legal Aid, its civil division, and the Gay Men's Health Crisis. Judge Jennings and her wife, the Honorable Juliet Howard, who we're also thrilled to have with us tonight, were the first same-sex inspires me always to ask this question was I attended a Pride event through my local Rotary district. And they happened to find what seemed to me to be like the only two people I've ever met in the same room who both had glowingly positive coming out stories, which I felt very glad for them about and also very jealous. Because my coming out was painful. And I don't know that everyone necessarily appreciates what that's necessarily like or what life may be like sort of living as an out person. That said, and I made this clear to our panelists beforehand, because these are such personal experiences, I insist it only be to the extent that you're comfortable sort of documenting what your experience is like. So just what is your life as an out person, or what has your life been like in whatever way that means to you? And I'm just gonna go down our row here, and I have a plan to sort of shift it fairly as we move along, but Justice Heyer, you're right next to me, and I'll ask you first.
Well, I want to thank you, and I have to tell you, what a beautiful place. I'm thinking about my own courtroom, and I don't have any stained glass. Judge Minahan, if you're watching, you can have the murals commissioned, and I'll accept them, and you could do whatever you'd like. I'll take whatever type of mural you want to put up, and some stained glass would be nice too. All right, but seriously, I found myself graduated from college. I went to Ramapo, and I had a political science and public policy degree, and my father was very concerned that I would never leave his basement. And I was working for a congressman and really just enjoying what I was doing. I was a constituent services director. So people would come in and they would have concerns about potholes and concerns about immigration and concerns about, I lost my Purple Heart, I need a replacement. And I loved sitting with people and talking with them about what their problems were and finding solutions. And Mr. Gilman was very, very specific. He said, I don't care if it's federal, state, or local, you fix that problem because that's what we're here for. I was so good at it, he put me in charge of 7 people, and I had a whole staff. I was in charge of the district. And I have to tell you, I really loved it. And I wanted to sort of impress him so that he would send me to Washington, D.C., and I could become one of the people that worked on legislation, because that's what all of the district people wanted. And he sat with me one day and said, listen, kid, you're going to go to law school because I've watched you and you're good at what you do. And if you get that extra information and that extra knowledge, you'll be able to go to law school and you'll be able to help that many more people, right? So I found myself in law school, and that's where I came out. And there's a man named Tony Verona. Tony was a professor. He was openly gay. He was the only one that we had that was LGBTQ at the time. And I scheduled a lunch, and I said, you know, I'm concerned that if I come out, that it's going to affect my ability to professionally grow. At the time, I wanted to come out of law school and open my own practice. And that's what I did. I don't recommend it. Okay. Learn your craft. I was successful, but it was definitely a difficult pathway. But the long and short of it was we had a very interesting lunch, and he said to me, be who you are and do what makes you feel comfortable, but don't be ashamed of who you are. So, you know, I took that to heart. And he also said something else that was very important. He said, you're here talking to me because you're a role model. I'm a role model for you. And it was true. I said that during the meeting. But he said, you could be a role model for other people, and you could open up doors that were not previously opened. So throughout my career, okay, Alan had mentioned that I was president of the Westchester County Bar. I was the first openly LGBTQ plus president. I was the first a lot of things. I was the first Supreme Court judge in the 9th JD that was openly LGBTQ. Now, did I walk into a room and say, I want you to support me or give me this position because of this particular thing? No, I'm also partially Hispanic. I'm a man. I'm a lot of different things. But I've always been very proud of who I was and who I am. And, you know, the person who's to my right, I'm listening to your bio and all the work that you've done for LGBTQ youth. Let me tell you something. Our youth are very, very at risk, okay? And one of the things that I've always felt that we could do for them as professionals is be open and be proud and be willing to mentor. I spend a lot of time going to law schools and to high schools and talking to students and letting them know that they could be successful being who they are. That's very important to me. And also giving people my cards and saying, call me. If you need help, I'm here. If you don't have somebody at home that you can talk to and you have a question about college, I was the first person in my family to go to a 4-year school. I was the first person to go to law school. I didn't have people to ask questions. My parents were very nice. They are very nice. I talk to them almost every day. They tell me what I'm doing wrong and remind me that, you know, I'm their son before I'm a judge, right? And I don't have any power when I come home. You know, they live with me part-time. But seriously, we have to do that. We have to be proud, and we have to be open, and we have to keep, you know, reminding the young people around us that we're here and we were successful in what we do, and they could be successful too. I think that's the most important thing we can do.
Thank you, Justice. And Nadia, same question to you. You know, what your life has been like, whether that's coming out, living as an out person, or within your profession, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Hello. Happy Pride. So I think it's been this journey. I think I came out and realized my own queerness while I was in grad school for social work. It was something that wasn't something that I was aware of for a long time. It's one of those things that you look back and you're like, there are some signs, right? But didn't really know it until I was in my sort of like mid-20s. And it was social justice that really like sort of started to bring that out in me, and meeting folks who were more diverse than the group that I grew up with. I'm adopted from Morocco. My parents are white. I think that also played a huge part in my sort of bearing anything that was different than the norm, because I already stood out enough and received enough discrimination unintentionally and intentionally within my home and community, right? So it's like, don't stray from the norm, bury it. And it wasn't until growing up and learning to have this voice and finding people who were courageously having that voice to be that image for me, taught me and allowed me to like look and see like, oh wait, what am I really feeling? What's going on? And explore that. And I was able to sort of marry the two goals, I guess, of myself, right? So being adopted from Morocco as an infant, sort of being plucked out of this orphanage by luck and given all this opportunity. I'd always wanted to work specifically with children and youth who are living outside of the home, that are not getting proper parental care. And so it's went through different ways of working in foster care or with other families, but as I learned about my own queerness and understanding the reality of a lot of queer youth, having such higher rates of suicide, being at such higher risk, being kicked out of their homes at, the rate and how having one person, like you're talking about, right? One person can change 40% increase in someone's ability to like have a life and feel good about themselves. And so marrying those two things into a work that is helping queer youth. I feel very lucky as sort of like a professional queer who works in a queer space. But when I get out of that little bubble, that's when I start to notice it even more, and how little often people don't have the education or the knowledge to do what they might want to do the right thing. And I think that's the biggest piece, or not taking it as seriously, even in advocacy spaces, finding that in different intersections. And so I think now that's the place where we're trying to like fit ourselves. And over that time, learning my own identity from sort of just a queer person to non-binary, and now trying to make that something that people understand, right? I think I'm accepted as a person of the LGBT community, but still having to correct pronouns to say that this is what non-binary looks like, and make that be something that people are seeing and acknowledging and celebrating is still like the work that I'm at right now. But yeah, well, I'm there.
So I think it would be great for me to share my coming out story, because it's not in line with everybody's coming out story, but I think that it kind of molded me for the next couple of years of my life. I grew up in a conservative Catholic family, and so I came out like in stages. I'm one of 4 children, so I started telling my sisters first, and I got decent reactions from them, and towards the end, it was right when I was getting ready to graduate from high school. It became time for me to come out to my parents, and I remember having a conversation with my older sister and being like, I don't really know how this is gonna go. And she kind of looked at me and she was like, what do you think? Mommy and Dad are gonna like kick you out of the house? And I just remember thinking like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And there was nothing in my upbringing where anyone who came into my household was disrespected for who they are or what they did. So there was no roadmap for me to believe that, but it was so embedded inside of me, just expecting disappointment or fear or confusion or whatever it was. And then the night came, and I remember I was inducted into the last honor society that I could have been inducted in high school, because I thought, well, in the scheme of things, if I come out as gay, at least I'm the smart one. It was like kind of this like bargaining inside of my mind. And I went into their room, and it took a while. It wasn't as straightforward as I'm putting it out now. There were some false starts, and I almost got there. And then I remember I kind of packed it in and said, this isn't the time. And my mother comes down the hallway into the bathroom and knocks on the door. I was washing my face or something. And I open the door, and she kind of just looks at me. And I was like, what is this? This is weird. Like, where's this going? And she said, oh, Matthew, we just love you so much, and we're so proud of you. She was like, do you remember when you were a kid and all you wanted to do was play with the My Little Ponies? And I said, yes, and I am the original brony. I will claim that title. And I said, yeah, I do remember that. And she said, and remember how, Graham and Gramp used to always say, like, get them model horses or whatever to make. And I said, yeah, I remember that. I do remember that. And she said, but I made them understand that if you wanted to play with My Little Ponies, that's what you wanted to do. And I said, yeah, I remember that, Mom. And she was like, that's all I wanted you to know. And I took that as a chance for her affirming me in some way without her saying to me, we know, which is never a good thing when somebody's, spent their whole life in the closet. So I go back into their room and I came out and there was some awkward questioning, without a doubt. And there was some confusion and there was some worry. And there were some, in particular for my father, who was very close with then and am still now, the silence was very difficult for me. And it took a couple of days, but I remember he worked for Con Ed his whole life, so he would leave very, very early in the morning. And one morning, he came into my bedroom, and I think he thought that I was sleeping. I was pretending that I was sleeping because I was still unsure as to how this was going. And he sat down next to me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "You're my son, and that's all I know." And I really couldn't have asked for anything other from my parents in a way of support and meaningful support, because they didn't understand, and they explain it as, we just want you to, your journey in the world is going to be different than our journey in the world because of this. And over the years, then I went to college and I just was out in college. It was an opportunity for me to be in a new space, and it was just easy for me to introduce I didn't come out and say, hey, Matt, everybody, I'm gay, but I just, I didn't hide it. And I remember years later, like most New York retirees, my parents have migrated south to the warmer weather. And I remember my father telling me a story that one of a friend of his, where he lives, told him that his son had recently come out to him as gay. And he was not about it. He was not really happy about it. And according to my father, and I have no reason not to believe him, he took this opportunity to bring this guy out to lunch and explain to him our story and journey. And in the end, he told this man that I was one of the most important things in his life, and that if he ostracized me from it, it would be his loss, not mine. And I remember hearing that story and being so proud of him for turning around and kind of paying it forward, all these years later. And I tell that story because I think it's important for people in one's inner circle to be almost blindly supportive for members of the LGBTQ plus community. Because there's so much stuff that happens before the coming out story is there. And even if you are in a supportive and affirming environment, we don't know how it's going to come off to you or what the reaction is. And so I've taken that in my journey in private practice. In addition to being a judge, we sit on the Equal Justice Committee. I'm a co-chair of that. I'm on the Gender Fairness Committee. And I try to at least give spotlight to stories where they might not otherwise be spotlight. To explain, because I think when we personalize our stories like this panel, it has an effect on people to just say, hey, I've sat at a table with somebody and heard a compelling story. And not to say that my coming out story is compelling, but I think that support, and again, not unwavering. The questions, I don't want to get into that side of it. There was some awkwardness, but in the end, it was very clear that my family would be there for me no matter what. And I urge anyone who maybe has somebody in their life who might be on the spectrum somewhere, questions are okay, but the support is what's very, very important.
Sure. I guess mine is sort of a combination of some of the previous coming out stories. If you know, the Black community, unfortunately, has not been very open to the LGBTQ community. It's been kind of shunned upon still to this day, unfortunately. my partner, my wife and I have been together for 30 years, so you imagine 30 years ago what it was like trying to come out to your parents. I was raised by a single mother who came from the South. She was very stern, but she was loving. That's what I always say about my mom. She was a loving mom. When Juliet first came over, it's kind of awkward situation in the Black community. I'm sure it's a lot of communities. There's these roles that people perceive as for a gay couple, there has to be a man, there has to be a woman. Who are you? Which one are you? And I was like, Ma, it's not like that. We love each other, and this is what we are. And after she kind of got it, she was like, okay, I got it. And my brothers and sisters have been nothing but loving and open. My mom was open and loving. She treated all her grandchildren exactly the same. She didn't treat my children any different from my brothers, my sisters. She treated everyone, all her grandchildren, the same. And it's important to me that just going out there and be an example to young people, especially young African American LGBT community who are having such a difficult time coming out, having places to go to have some place that they can go to and feel comfortable. I'm one of the founding board members of the Brooklyn Community Pride Center. That was very important to me to get that off the ground because Brooklyn was the biggest borough with the LGBTQ community. Park Slope was sort of known as the LGBTQ community. It's not like that anymore. If you go to the Park Slope now, it's a completely different. The LGBTQ community in Brooklyn has completely spread out. We're all over the place, but this is a gathering place for us to go and to feel safe. So for me, it's important to continue to give back. Our son is queer, and then, believe it or not, having two moms, he was so nervous about coming out. I mean, he sat us down and he said, I have something to tell you. And we were like, okay, are you okay? Is there anything wrong? He says, I'm gay. I'm like, okay, you have two moms. What's the problem? But he was very nervous because he knows what that means. And for me, it's very important to give the youth an opportunity, to give them some place to come and feel comfortable. We're all on the FAILA Commission. I think everybody up here except is on the FAILA Commission, so we are doing mentoring. But it's also important to me to give back to my community, the Black community, because it's such a difficult time. They are still having a difficult time. So that's important to me. My coming out story is like everyone else. I mean, it's not bad, but it turned out to be very good. And I thank my family for that. They still support us to this day. Unfortunately, I lost my sister about 3 months ago, and she loved her nephews. She would, everyone was treated the same. So that's important to me, that family understands that we're no different than anyone else. We're a family. We're all gonna go here one day, and we wanna be known as someone who has given back. People are not gonna know that I'm a judge when I pass away. They may know 5 years and then boom, I'm gone. But the effect that I can have later on that's more lasting, that's for me, is what I wanna do.
So I came out as gay in middle school, and I just kind of like didn't realize that it was taboo. Someone asked me if I would ever kiss a girl, and I was like, yeah, you wouldn't, like what? And I kind of like got more comfortable with myself. My self-expression got more comfortable. And when I came out as gay to my mom in middle school, my dad was just kind of like, you're gonna do what you're gonna do, whatever. But my mom was like, I don't want you to have a hard life. Things are gonna be more complicated now, all that, the whole, don't shout it from the rooftops. And so now this is my job. But I knew that I was a little more comfortable after it came out as gay, but that it wasn't the whole picture. I had friends in high school who like wanted to go clubbing, and it was all a bunch of straight girls, and they would like want to go find boys, and I was the wingman, and I was like, this is not entertaining for me. This is not how I want to spend my time. And so in college, I met some trans people, and I thought, okay, first I met a binary trans man, so it was someone who was assigned female at birth, transitioned, and identified as male. he had had top surgery, he had had bottom surgery, and I was like, okay, I know that part of this is part of my story, part of my journey, not all of it. I'm definitely not a man. And I very much still to this day, like, every day I feel more and more non-binary. Like, just, for when I first came out as non-binary in college or after college, I had a conversation with my dad, and he was like, "So you never feel feminine at all?" And at the time, I was like, "No, I don't." And now I'm like, everything's feelings. But so I came out as gay, and I was like the only girl in my high school who was out. And then I went to college and I met some trans people, and I still didn't come out until I didn't even really use the label for myself or understand what that meant until years later. I was almost 30, and I was teaching religious education on Sunday morning, and the high school students that I was teaching did their pronouns with their intros. And I was like, you can just ask people to call you something else. And so these 17-year-olds were the first people who got me like into knowing that I could just ask people to reflect what I actually am and what I feel like. And so I started doing that. And at first I was like, okay, I'll use he and they just to make it easier for everyone. Because my appearance was fairly masculine. I've looked like this besides the scruff since senior year of high school. I cut my hair off like 2 weeks before prom. My mom is still angry about it. So I wore a pink dress to balance the scales. And once I realized, like, it feels better when people address me the way that I actually feel, and when I can just be like, oh, this is who I am, and take it or leave it. Yes, there are times that I'm kind of not giving credibility or whatever. I got carded the other day to buy spray paint at Lowe's because I look 12. But like in the courtroom especially, or in the courts, before I transitioned, I was a tiny lesbian with a tiny voice, and I would wear a suit. And people would approach me in one way, and then I would introduce myself with my name and my effeminate voice, and I could see their wheels turning, and I could see how they were treating me differently, like in that moment. And so eventually I was like, okay, I know that there are certain medical things that I want to do to transition, and I got to the point where it was a problem for me to practice law with my legal name, my given name. So I looked into it with the Appellate Division Second Department, and this is something that I want to work on in the coming year. Attorneys cannot practice law using their common law name unless it is a derivative of their name. So Robert can practice as Bob, but I could not practice as Charlie, even though my name rhymed with that, even with paperwork, whatever. So I got a court-ordered name change in Nassau County, which at the time required you to notify the Department of Homeland Security 30 days before you filed. So DHS has a file on me because I needed to practice as Charlie. And then you go in and you file, and then they also used to make you notify the Board of Elections whether you were a citizen or not and could vote. They also made you notify Homeland Security after your name change. And it's a whole other story, but they don't do that anymore. We've fixed that. But those are the kinds of little things, though, that when we're talking about barriers in here, like those are the kinds of things you don't even realize that they don't make sense until someone's like, why are we doing this? This person can't even register to vote. Why are they notifying the Board of Elections? So I changed my name, and in the midst of that, I was trying to find a job for a few years. I was interviewing, and I would walk in and they'd be like, we don't know which bathroom code to give you. And my mom would be like, don't wear a suit and tie to this interview, wear funky socks. And little does the grown-ups in my life don't realize, like, funky socks are actually a really important part of the queer community and culture. So I do wear funky socks often, but that's not how I need to express myself professionally. I need to walk in to, if I'm in a courtroom or if I'm in an office, like, why can't I just be dressed in professional attire like everyone else, or in a way that's comfortable for me? And so that shift, as I was transitioning, was really interesting because I could feel how differently I was being treated from before. And I've now gone from like advocacy world into the court system, and that has been a really serious culture shock. And to be honest, in a lot of ways, I've been treated better in the court system than in advocacy world, and in some ways deferred to more, and in some less. But I think that I've been working either as a court user, an attorney, or someone who works for the court system for about 10 years now, and the change that I have seen in the way the courts deal with this stuff is profound. And I feel it personally. I share it with my community members. There's a lot of work still to do, and we'll talk about some of that, but I really, I do want to appreciate and applaud the changes that have been made over the past few years, especially, and the folks on the ground who are in decision-making positions who are making sure that this stuff gets addressed, and they're responsive when things go awry, or as I call it, when something LGBT happens in the court.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie, and thank you all again for sharing your stories. As I said earlier, these are not easy things to share, and I also sort of threw you all in the deep end without sharing my own story. So I'm sorry about that. For my coming out story, it really is actually mixed in with my alcoholism. The way I came out was I would get close to blackout drunk and would tell someone, one person, one relative. And then right up until the end, everyone was very supportive and encouraging. And I'd go, okay, great, yay. And then I'd, finish whatever, drinking I was on. And then, wake up the next day and like, okay, check that person off the list. Next, I got to check this person. Now, thankfully, I've become much more comfortable in my identity. I've also gotten sober. I'm about 4 years and 9 months sober as of today. Thank you. For the record, that's not why I say that. I don't say that to get applause. But I actually say it in this context because our community, it tends to, from what I understand, and some of you may have the data points more than I do, almost disproportionately has mental health and substance use issues. And that affects the way we're able to not only exist as a community and do what we need to do, but to then the kind of help that we need from the court system, from our government. So Nadia, I want to start with you because I haven't given you a chance yet to say what the Ali Forney Center does, so I do want to ask you to do that. But you are working with youth who need the courts in a number of different ways. And all of us, and I do want to ask everyone, we all do interact with our community at different points in the court system. So I want to ask everyone about that. But to start with you, Nadia, again, you are working with these people when they're at a critical need for services from their government and from the courts. So to start sort of identifying the problem, what do you see are the needs of our community as what we call court users, what we need, what our community needs from the court system?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll explain what the Ali Forney Center is, AFC for short. The Ali Forney Center is a program that supports LGBTQ unhoused youth ages 16 to 24. All of our direct services are based in New York City, but we serve youth from all over the world, really. Half of our youth come from outside of New York State, about 40 from across the US, and about 13-ish% from international. We have full wraparound comprehensive services and a 24-hour 365 drop-in center. We never close any of our doors. We have 13 different housing sites that houses 163 folks a night, and we have very long wait lists. The way it works for folks who don't know the runaway and homeless youth system is housing is separate, so they by age, so 16 to 20-year-olds and 21 to 24-year-olds. The 21 to 24-year-olds are way underfunded and are often waiting 6 months to move out of a drop-in center, which does not have a bed. It is literally just a big community room to be able to have a place to sleep. And especially for our LGBTQ youth, the DHS shelters, the other housing programs that are not LGBT specific are not, still to this day, do not feel safe enough. We came out of a history of a person, Ali Fournay. Ali Fournay was a person who was a young person who entered the foster care system at age 13, experienced continued abuse for their identity while in foster care, left, and entered the runaway and homeless youth system. And at that time, there weren't LGBT programs that were specific, and would then decide that the streets were safer for them than the shelters that were supposed to house them, right? And so that is the reality of our young people even today. And Ali was murdered in the late 90s. And so in Ali's name, created the Ali Fournay Center, which was the first and now the largest program serving LGBTQ unhoused youth. And we serve about 2,000 youth a year, to paint sort of the size. And most of our young people are coming to us at 18 or 19 years old, right? So they're coming to us, it's either their families like, get out at 18, we've done our job and we don't put up with this anymore, or it's like, I'm 18 and I'm getting the hell out of here, right? And this is no longer safe for me. We know family rejection puts people at such a higher risk for all types of different risky behavior and abuse. You're 6 times as likely to attempt suicide. You're 3 times as likely to have a substance use disorder. You're 3 times as likely to contract HIV, right? All of those things are a piece of what it means to be unhoused and have that inconsistent support, and to deal with the trauma. Like when our young people come to us for the first time, it is often, maybe they haven't eaten in days, right? That they are coming out of experiences of what did it take for them to get to our doors? What happened to them during that time? Often hadn't been propositioned or has experienced sexual abuse, and having to do what you need to do to survive, right? And that trauma as a young person is compounded, and then compounded by a system that's not actually supporting them as well as it should. And so our young people need housing. Everyone needs a home. And so it also feels, I don't know, no, I don't want to curse, but like it's just really maddening. It's just so upsetting and exhausting to continue to have to fight for basic needs for a 16-year-old, right? For anyone. And that's, our young people are fighting just to be seen and to be heard. And it comes out in these really large, traumatic ways to paint that picture. But I'll let other folks also chime into what they're seeing. But yeah.
And are there, well, thank you for sharing that and sort of giving it not just an understanding on what your work is, but the scope and magnitude of the problem. When it comes to, or are there, do you see any particular needs with regard to us, with regard to the court system? Because housing, you know, and I'm not minimizing any of the things that you said, there are, you know, different agencies where we need, you know, more support or funding or whatever it may be. But when it comes to the community you're serving and their needs in the court system, what kinds of needs are you seeing, or where are we falling short?
Yeah, so this goes, it's a spectrum of kind of what Charlie was explaining with name changes and gender marker changes, which has really improved over the years. But having access to it and fast access to it is something that thankfully we have a partnership with legal aid that does it. But that's not it's not a system that is easily accessible or clear. And so I think expanding the way in which people can access that, we've lowered the barrier of what it needs to do it, but there's still long wait lists, there's still, it's unclear, there's still folks where it doesn't feel like a friendly face, people don't understand, you get misgendered at that office, right? It doesn't feel welcoming, especially for a young person trying to navigate a system. And then thinking about how poverty and homelessness is criminalized, right? So young people are ending up in the court system and being arrested for doing things they need to survive, and sometimes just existing because of profiling, right? There's a Supreme Court case out right now that's waiting on decision about Grand Pass in Oregon versus Johnson, which would criminalize people for sleeping on the street. This would be devastating to our young people because it's already happening. And so if we give people the ability to actually criminalize people when the resources are not being given, it just feels, it's just evil, right? People, especially our trans folks, are then often profiled, right? They're profiled for someone thinking that they're a sex worker or for doing sex work or to do things that they need to survive and trying to live on the streets. And that is where often it's getting in the trouble, right? And so it's like, okay, we're already criminalizing. How is that police officer having that interaction? Often violent, over 90% of our youth are BIPOC as well, right? So we're adding that compounded risk for trauma and abuse. What are they marking down that police officer when if they do arrest them, right? And then that gender marker that's on that ticket that's then going through the system is really hard to change, and who's advocating for them to change it? I think especially our young people, queer people, trans people really need advocates in the court to be there in the same way like CASA advocates for family court and everything, and needs people to be able to speak up for them and have these conversations and do it in a way that is coming forward in a private way and a way that's respectful and saying, hey, I want to know what you need to go through this system in a way that's going to feel as safe as possible, right? Because we all know it's going to be incredibly stressful, but how can we minimize that with just basic human rights and decency to then be able to move through the process of the legal system? Yeah.
I really appreciate that answer. Thank you so much. And Judge Parker, I wanted to ask you, as I mentioned, supervising judge, civil court, Bronx County. These are not, the billion-dollar blockbuster cases, but these are, the way I think of, or I don't remember who told me this, but these are the litigants in your court. These are the most important cases of their lives. These are the cases that matter to them. And I want to know what your experience is in terms of their challenges.
Sure, thank you for that. And I think it's important to highlight, Judge Jennings and I sit technically in the New York City Civil Court together. She's in the housing part, I'm in the civil part. The New York City Civil Court truly is the people's court. 98% of our cases involve at least one self-represented litigant. And we even don't love using that self-represented term so much. Pro se is interchangeable, but they're not attorneys. They're not representing themselves. They're just trying to get through the court appearance. Charlie was right. There have been leaps and bounds of progress going forward. The name change overhaul and gender demarcation was an amazing thing. It took a while for the judges to follow up and learn it. Yeah. So things that I've done, like when that came out, when the legislation passed and actually banned us from directing any of those notices and banned us from looking for things like medical records for people who were transitioning, which was, I think, always just an invasion into someone's life, is to have conversations amongst the judges in regular meetings as to what they're seeing in the courtrooms and, kick some things around as to, well, this litigant appeared and this came up and I had never been exposed to it before, and I always ask, well, what did you do? I always say we judge enough in our professional lives. We try not to judge personally, but there are some times when I said, well, what if you looked at it this way? I think putting yourselves into the litigants into their shoes is always a very important thing. And in particular in the civil court, one of the things that we've noticed, and this is not just limited to the LGBTQ plus community. I think since COVID, the judges we've noticed, there are people appearing in the civil court with mental health issues. And there are some programs in the court system that provide guardian ad litem and indemnification and blah, blah, blah. But there's no program like that in the civil court. And I think I was the one who said that every case is important to the person who comes in front of us because, yeah, these civil cases, they don't involve housing. They may not involve specifically, civil rights, but someone feels that they have been aggrieved and they want to be listened to in a fair, respectful, and empathetic manner. And I think that when certain people come in and aren't at least opened to not just hearing a case, but listening to the litigants, things are lost. And I think that leads to, the erosion of trust and faith in the judicial system. For me personally, I think, or I know, my position as a white cisgendered male is different from other people in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. So I have made it a point to educate myself by reading, by watching different documentaries, whether it's, reading and not only just nonfiction, but fiction too. I think it's great to see art and look at art through the eyes of people who are dissimilar from yourselves. And I do think, and we might all agree, the services for LGBTQ plus people, litigants in the court system, they could be better. I think that we all kind of have to put our heads together and figure out why. But we've made great progress. We have bench cards now. I know Judge Heyer was involved in the creation of bench cards, which are very helpful to have something to grab right on the bench and say, how do I look at this way? We love cheat sheets on the bench. So things like that are great.
Excellent, thank you. And Judge Jennings, as we've mentioned before, in housing court, again, a different angle on what constituents need. What are some of the barriers you're seeing our community who use your court that they're facing, or the challenges they're facing?
I mean, I think everyone who's ever been to housing court, you know how crazy it is. It's just jam-packed, full of cases that are moving very quickly. I think that it was important that Charlie and Juliet and I did actually a training for the housing court judges and the court attorneys on the bench card. And even with that training, I think they were still uncomfortable as far as how to address trans people when they come in. Unfortunately, I think there needs to be, I don't want to pick on one particular group in the court, but there needs to be training. People are just not comfortable with trans people coming into court. Court officers, sometimes there's giggling in the back. That's something that I don't allow. I think that every judge has to make sure that their staff is aware of how to address people when they come into the court, to treat people with respect when they come in, especially in my court, that's done. I ask people, and I do feel comfortable asking people what preferred pronoun that they like me to use for them. I had a particular case where it was a trans woman who was there with her father. Her father kept calling him him, kept calling him him. I said, listen, I know you're his father, you're her father, but that's not how she wants to be addressed. In my courtroom, I'm going to address her the way she wants to be addressed. And I think it's important, and she feels important that you and her brother was there as well, address her the way she wanted to be addressed. So I think as far as the court, there needs to be continuing to be training at every level, even in the academy, court attorneys, judges, clerks, everyone who comes in needs to be trained about how to address people and address trans people, especially trans people when they come in. That to me is I see as a bigger issue. Because when a person comes in identifying as a woman, the name says a man. So there's always that issue when people come in. I think that that's something that we need to make sure that people become more and more comfortable with. So the training would give them that, hopefully that comfortability. Also the judges making sure that their court is run and direct their people, or whatever you want to call it, make sure their people who are working with them understand that they need to treat everyone with respect and address them that way, the way that they feel comfortable.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. And talking about training, Charlie, this is starting to get into your wheelhouse here. You're with the commission on sort of a policy making, might be a little strong, but that's you're focused on policy. And you are a statewide commission, so you're looking at data all over the state. What are you seeing are some of the challenges that our community is facing from the court user side?
So before I was with the court, I was using the court as primarily a name change attorney, but I was also collecting all of this anecdata from my peers who were both practicing and being represented in the courts. And so I've seen kind of this like long-term trend of kind of what's been going on. And consistently, privacy is a huge issue, especially around name changes. So even when privacy is granted, there are administrative reasons that it's not happening properly. So we're working on fixes to that. Like the training and stuff, like it's a 15,000 person system, and every courthouse is completely different from the others. And so especially like I just moved upstate this week, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to every county, like in the next year, I'm going to make friends with all the clerks, I'll make friends with all the judges, and I'll just bounce around and make sure that they know, like, there is someone who you can call about this stuff so that you don't put your foot in your mouth, so that you don't make a policy that inadvertently causes harm. You know, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that a lot of the structural change that is happening is coming from OCA listening to, and the courts listening to the community members who are bringing them information and data about how things are actually going. And so when, you know, there was a complaint about a CLE that gave incorrect information because of the speaker's own bias and in Nassau. And so that sort of thing, like if someone had just spoken to a trans person before that was planned, we could have been like, you don't want to have someone who's going to speak on this topic because that is not an appropriate conversation for the court to be having. Like for people who live it, it's easy for us to be like, nope, don't do that. Or like, maybe you want to frame it this way. And like little changes in framing can really completely change a person's experience with the court. Even like we were working on the new name change do-it-yourself forms, and the way the form was written, it made it seem like it was asking the judges to order an out-of-state Department of Health to change a gender marker. That's not what the statute says. That's not what we intended the form to say. We wanted a declaratory judgment. So, like, if that had been talked about before the form was put out, it could have been not, you know, we wouldn't have had to revise it. That sort of stuff where, like, we know where the hiccups are because we live with them and we hear about them from peers and community members. And so the biggest thing, like if you are working on policies or if you get feedback about an issue in your courtroom, in your courthouse, in your office, whatever it is, like the Failure Commission exists for you to bounce ideas off of, and you know, to have a better understanding of kind of the tools that are out there, what kinds of programming we could do in your courthouse. You know, if there are specific people who are causing trouble, maybe that's a different conversation. You know, and I'm doing a program with Nassau Suffolk Law Services and the Nassau County Bar Association on the 11th with Judge Richardson, Antonio Seda, and Judge Goodstein, where we're going to be talking about kind of like, if you're an attorney and you have an LGBTQ client and something happens in the courtroom or in the course of litigation or whatever, or if you're an LGBTQ attorney or an LGBTQ court user and something happens, how do you know this is an appeal, this is for the Inspector General, this is for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, whatever, you know, there are so many different kind of avenues, and so just having an understanding of how to triage that stuff and kind of direct traffic so that you can get the court user to the solution that's actually going to solve their problem. And I love working with Judge Richardson's team on this stuff because we can see, like, this is the feedback we're getting. How do we synthesize this feedback and make something productive out of it so that we're organizing the courtroom or the space in the first instance in a way that's not going to create unforced errors. There are so many unforced errors, and like, you know, trans people have a lot of patience, and we're very good-natured in a lot of respects, but like it gets very tiring and old, especially like if you're trying to use the court for something completely unrelated, and this is now becoming an issue in your court experience. What do you do? What does your attorney do? If you don't have an attorney, how can you get legal advice about what's appropriate, that kind of thing. So we're working on structural changes and systemic kind of infrastructural support for both employees and court users and attorneys so that, you know, if an attorney gets misgendered from the bench, they don't have to feel like, you know, I don't have anywhere to go because if I appeal this, the judge is going to be mad at me and it will impact, you know, my client. Or an employee, you know, I know we'll talk about OCA employees specifically, but just like the chain of command for how you complain about things in the usual course of business doesn't make sense for an LGBTQ employee complaining about something LGBTQ. And we'll talk about that when we get there, but.
Yeah, no, and these are excellent points. And I mean, to sort of validate that, you know, something I learned by asking someone was I was building a form and had a gender section, and you know, male, female, you know, non-binary, gender non-conforming, other. And what I was told, and I've always, it's now one of those, pet peeves that's always going to be in the back of my mind. Don't say other, say not listed, because other makes it sort of demonic or, others. It others you, right? And, that was something that I would have never just considered had I not spoken to someone, and they gave me that advice, and now it's something I see all the time. And Right in, yeah, that's another excellent one. And now I start judging, all these multi-million-dollar corporations that clearly didn't have that conversation with someone. So, right. Justice Heyer, I didn't mention this before, but you're sitting in a matrimonial part in Westchester. So again, you're seeing litigants in a different capacity. But Judge Parker Rasso also mentioned, this work that you've done. And this is the part where all these First Department people get to learn why I invited a Westchester Supreme Court justice down here. You've done all this fantastic work for our community. You've pushed the transgender bench card that Judge Parker Rasso mentioned. That not only was OCA approved, it was New York State Bar Association approved, and then it was American Bar Association approved, all at your work. And you continued to do this kind of work statewide. And again, I want to ask you what you see are the needs of our community on the court user side. And if you want to talk about some of these efforts that you have done or are doing, because you are tireless in this effort, I know firsthand.
Well, thank you for your kind words. So one of the reasons I became a judge was because I felt that our nation was at a critical point where people were questioning our institutions of government and specifically our court system. And I traveled around the Hudson Valley telling people again and again and again that the rule of law was the cornerstone of our democracy. And my partner said, if I hear you say that one more time, but I truly do mean it. When people come into the court system, they should walk through the doors, they should feel that they're heard and that they're respected, regardless of whatever defining characteristic that they're thinking of at that point in time, their gender, their religion, their sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a key component of our justice system. Now, on a micro level, in a perfect situation, every single judge and every single court staff member, okay, and everybody's important, okay, the court officers, the court reporters, the court clerks, the court attorneys, okay, everybody's important because if the court user has a bad interaction with anybody, it reflects upon the entire court system. So on a micro level, every day when we come to work, we need to make sure that we make people feel comfortable and that we do our best to make sure that the court system looks open and accepting and inclusive. However, on a macro level, we need to constantly revisit how the court system operates. Now, I'm in a matrimonial part, which means that people are coming to the court and they're dealing with some of the most difficult times in their lives. They're questioning what's going to happen with their home. They're questioning whether or not they're going to have enough money to pay their bills. Are they going to be able to see their children? Are their children going to live with them? Are they going to have an access schedule? What is it going to be? It's very scary, okay? So I constantly am thinking about ways in which the court system can improve. And one of the basic ways is things like this. We need to let the communities know, not just the LGBT community, okay, but through our access to justice programs and equal justice in the courts programs, we need to reach out to as many demographics as possible to tell them that they are welcome in the court system. So these programs are very important. But it's also important to look at things like, how do we train our attorneys for the children? How do we train our court evaluators in guardianship programs, right, and proceedings? How do we handle training for all of the court-appointed professionals? We need to make sure that they have special training, all right? I handled a guardianship case years ago, okay, and without getting into specifics, we had different court-appointed professionals, and we were dealing with an LGBT gentleman who was in a nursing facility, and there were specific issues that he was dealing with people that really, just frankly, I don't think understood the LGBT community. I was involved in the case, and I advocated, but I'm very proud to be part of the Office of Court Administration and the Unified Court System because we are doing things consistently through Judge Mendelson's Office of Justice initiatives, but also through the Access to Justice committees and Equal Justice in the Courts committees throughout the 12 districts of the state of New York and through the Court of Claims. We're constantly thinking about ways to improve the system. Is it perfect? No. But I'm very proud that I come to work and I know that people are constantly thinking about ways to sort of improve upon what we've done. The bench card was important because something as simple as talking to somebody and recognizing them for how they identify themselves and utilizing proper pronouns, okay, could be very instrumental in how they feel about how they're being treated. Now, I appreciate you saying that I did a lot of work. I helped, but Kristen Browdy, okay, was a huge part of this. Shane Filcher, okay, and a lot of others, okay, and really that's part of the process too. We in the court system need to invite as many people around the table as possible, develop working groups, okay, engage in fact finding, and really take all of that combined knowledge and distill it into good policy. And I think that's what's happening, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, to be sure. I'm not going to go into specifics because I think there's too much to list. But I'm very proud to be part of a organization that cares about these issues enough to constantly be reflecting upon it.
No. Yeah, please. Or here, you can take it.
I agree. Training is so important. I also want to add that the accountability after that training is also so important, right? We can teach people, we can have these conversations, but then what happens after? What's going to keep people from saying like, yes, I'm going to learn what I'm going to learn, right? And go through it. If we're not keeping people accountable in different ways, and ways in which we're reporting, and ways in which we are calling each other in, just even like on a, not even in like a punitive way, just sort of in a community norm that we're doing these things. The training is only going to go so far. And as for folks who might be like building these trainings or attending these trainings, I train a lot of people. You can learn about pronouns, you can learn about all these things, you can learn the facts. What has to happen for change is empathy. You have to understand how a cis-normative, a heteronormative world affects all of us. We've all been told we can or cannot do something because of our gender. So releasing all these things that are so ingrained in literally all of us, I have to unlearn stuff because we live in the society that we live in, right? So we have to understand how all of this can also impact us individually, so that when that person is able to look at someone and say, okay, I can understand that feeling. I might not understand everything about you and your identity, and that doesn't really matter because I can understand who you are and your soul and what that feeling is, and make a different choice.
No, thank you. Those are excellent points. Charlie, you're
that's
dying to jump in.
That's just the difference, like between like just doing the trainings and like I want to go to every clerk's office and look at them in the eye and be like, I am a trans person who is telling you to ask me questions if you have them, so that you don't have to ask the person who is trying to use the court in front of you. And the fact that this position even exists at this point, like, is mind-blowing to me. And it was funny, like when I was in practice, I ended up kind of doing this and being the intermediary with Matt and all the practitioners, and then I ended up in this role. But it's really just like the fact that they made it an actual position is so important, because I think it makes sense for it to be at least a point person or a team that, you know, kind of knows the lay of the land and can, like I was saying, triage and say like, this is how things work on the back end. This is maybe why, you know, some of the things that I wanted to do when I was a practitioner, I now see, okay, this is why that didn't work. And so having that kind of like Luther the anger translator for like the community to the courts, I think is going to be really transformative, which is cool.
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much. And I have been looking at my watch, not out of disrespect, but only because I'm very disappointed. We only have about 10 minutes left. So Judge Parker-Rasso, I'll give you all my questions I didn't get to ask, and you can think about them for your program on Thursday. You know, I guess the question that I want to close on, and I have a few figures for this. It has to do with allyship. You know, what I hope is that the majority of people watching this online are not members of our community, that they are people watching to be educated, to learn more, and to find out what they can do to be better allies. And to highlight, you know, there's no federal census data on how many LGBTQ plus people there are in the United States. But there are some estimates. One estimate from the Williams Institute at UCLA Law School puts it at about 5% of the US population, about 14 million, 5.5%, about 14 million people. The Human Rights Campaign cites data from the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey that suggests that figure's higher, around 8%, about 20 million people. But we're still a minority. I think we're not going to get anything done without allyship, without people willing to step up and help us. And within the court system, I'm sure the three of our judges have some familiarity with this, that there's a statewide judicial demographics report that asks judges to self-report their demographic characteristics. For 2024, 1,023 judges completed that survey, which was about 79%. Of those who responded on gender, 90% identified as male or female, and 9% declined to answer. So there were, 2 judges selected other not listed, 1 judge identified as human, and 1 judge identified as non-binary. So out of 1,023 judges, 5 affirmatively, identified as something other. Well, there you go. On sexual orientation, 80% identified as heterosexual and 16% identified as prefer not to answer. So again, counting those who self-identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, or other not listed, that was about 5% of the judges who completed the survey, about 50 judges. So all of this is to say, we are not, despite, I think, this sort of outsized attention that is sometimes put on our community, we are a minority group, and we do need effective allyship. And what I want to close by asking each of you is, what does that mean? Whatever that means to you, whether that's generally, whether that's in your role as a judge, whether that's as a court employee, what does that mean? And someone that is sympathetic to our community, that wants to be part of the solution, what do you tell them to do? Judge Parkeresso, if you'd like to start.
I would say put yourself around people who are within the community to learn from them. I think it's important too, and this doesn't just go for LGBTQ plus people, it's all demographics. We all have a finite perspective, and we don't get to broaden that unless we broaden the people with whom we hang out and work with. And like I said before, I think it's important to not just read a treatise on whatever, the statistics of LGBTQ people in the court. Find a queer author, watch a queer movie. I think it's important to expose oneself to that because, again, empathy is the key in our business. And I just think it's important to, I think someone said, know what you don't know as well, and be comfortable with reaching out and finding bridges to build. But for people who are non-LGBTQ+, there's someone in your life, whether you know about it or not. I coming from the Bronx, there was, when I was elected in 2019 to the civil court bench, I was described as the first openly gay LGBTQ person elected in the Bronx, but I know that there were LGBTQ+ people on the bench before me. They could not do it because it just wasn't a thing, it wasn't accepted. They probably wouldn't have got there in those years. And I think it's important for us to all acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of those people who couldn't be out. And I feel like taking the step forward, we carry their legacy onto the next step, and we broaden that to the non-LGBTQ+ community to just say it is an ever-evolving thing, and we all need to be a part of it across all boundaries.
I think obviously forming allies is very important. I think we have. But I think it's also important that we work together and grow together as the LGBTQ community. Like Matt said, there are judges who are not out. In Brooklyn, they're not comfortable about being out. I know we had the Gay Straight Alliance that was in Brooklyn. That was one of the groups that was started in Brooklyn when I was there. We need to expand those. And I think it's also important that we get in touch and work with the students at the law schools. I think that's something that the FALA Commission is working on, and also growing LGBTQ judges. Most of the judges that are on the FALA Commission are actually from the Court of Claims. And they're from upstate too. I'm like, okay, the fourth department, Judge Gary and all that, they're from upstate. But I know that there are more LGBTQ judges down here. They may not be out, but we need to make them comfortable. Like for instance, I'm running for civil court in Brooklyn. I will be the first Black gay judge in Brooklyn. That's ridiculous. And there are only, when I get elected, I'm running unopposed in Brooklyn, it will be me and Richard Monteleone. That's it for the borough of Brooklyn. And I know that there's more, and we need to start recruiting and getting candidates interested and running for the bench so we can have an impact, so we can make changes and get involved in organizations like FAILA and the students and getting the students involved, just getting organizations. I always say, let's start in-house first. We start asking people to come back, help us out, because we need to get our stuff, we always say, get our house in order first before we go out to somebody else. So that's, for me, that's important, is that we start organizing within us before we go out. And we have allies. I don't think we can say we have a shortage of allies. We have a lot of allies. So let's get ourselves together, and so then bring them in to help us out.
No, thank you, Judge. I think that's an excellent point. And I did pull data. Your Honor mentioned law schools. And I did look. There are 15 law schools in New York State. All of them have some form under one name or another of a LGBTQ plus student group. Most of them are some variation of outlaw, capitalization or plural. PACE and Toro, instead, they call the Lambda Law Students Association. But all of those groups are LGBTQ plus affinity groups at every New York State law school. So just to put the data point on that. But Charlie, yeah.
So they all have affinity groups, but that does not mean that institutionally those students are supported. And we have heard a lot of really troubling stuff from almost every law school. Even ones that I work with, things have happened at events that I have been doing. And if we want to diversify the bench, and if we want to make it possible for LGBTQ people and trans people specifically to ascend to the bench and to be in the practice of law, it has to be sustainable, and the court needs to show that it's supporting law students as they come up, and also in that time that they're attorneys and they're learning what you do, the nuts and bolts of being a judge, whatever. Like, we need to account for the realities of that experience, and that, like, if you transition in the middle of your career, like, that's going to look different than if you went to law school and you had already transitioned. And the fact is, because of the timing of all of this, we don't have a ton of, people who transitioned on the bench, or people who were, had transitioned and then were appointed, besides Seth. Where's Seth? But I think it's really the responsibility of the court system to set a good example for the law schools and provide for some accountability with the law schools. I know it's a weird position because the court can't tell the law schools what to do, but they can set up programming and support that shows this is how you engage LGBTQ people in the legal system and in the legal profession. And I think also there's a real people don't want to use their capital always in a productive way, and you have to be willing to maybe lose something in that, if someone is marginalized in a different way than you, or you're not being held back in the way that they are, that's when it's your responsibility to be the mouth for that person and make sure that their concerns get heard, that their problems are addressed, because maybe you're not at as much risk as that person might be. If I work for the court system and there's a litigant who comes to me and says, this judge said XYZ, what do I do? I'm not going to get in trouble if I go talk to their supervisor, but that litigant might have a real problem if the judge finds out that they complained. So just kind of like situating yourself and understanding when it's appropriate to use your conditional privilege and your capital. Like, for me, people treat me differently when they think they're talking to a cisgender white guy than they do when they realize they're talking to a trans person. And so being able to kind of utilize that power productively, I think is a really important thing for everyone, whether you're in the community or, you know, not, and you're able to use that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Justice Heyer on allyship.
Well, I want to touch upon two points to sort of build upon what was already discussed. One issue with the law schools, I actually, I'm very proud to be on the Board of Visitors at Pace Law School. I graduated from Pace, and one of the things we set up last year was a mentoring program. We had David Freed, Sherry Eisenpress, two Supreme Court judges in the Ninth JD, along with myself, do a panel discussion about practicing law, becoming a judge, dealing with different experiences. And we shared that with about 40 students that came that were mostly part of the Lambda Law Society. It was a point of personal pride for me because I formed the Lambda Law Society with a couple of my friends when I was at Pace because we previously didn't have one. Now that's a yearly event that we're going to be doing. And I want to mention, it wasn't just a panel discussion. It was followed by the three of the judges, each of us taking a third of the audience, and then meeting with them separately and actually having a mentoring circle. What are you looking to do? How can we help you? Do you need an internship? Are you interested? Can we provide you with some introductions? And those students still contact us. And we're going to continue that process. The three of us are recently elected, and we're going to continue to do this. We're invested in this. Okay? That's something that we should do with each one of the law schools. Number two, when I got elected, one of the first things I did was I reached out to Curtis Farber, who at the time was the president of the Gay and Lesbian Judges Association for New York. Curtis is a great guy, and he said, Jim, we haven't really been active for a really long time. No problem. I can tell you now, a year later, we have a robust membership. We've got some people that are on the board and members that are on this panel. Okay, we as judges realize that in the LGBTQ plus community, we have a responsibility. We're going to work with the FIALA Commission, the LGBT Lawyers Association of New York, the Gay Straight Alliance in the Courts, the Lambda student groups. We just redid our bylaws. We're having an event later on this year. And most importantly, and when we talk about allyship, there's actually a Judicial Associations Council that's run by the New York State Bar Association. They meet on a regular basis. They talk about important issues to the judiciary and the legal system. I'm very proud to say that our community is represented there because the judges have reorganized. And now it is the LGBTQ plus Judges Association. And it's not just judges that are elected. It's judges that are appointed. It's administrative law judges. And it's hearings officers, right? Why did we do it that way? We're probably, I think, the only judicial association that did. Because we want to provide a pathway for mentoring, okay? We want the hearings officers and the administrative law judges to consider moving up. We want the appointed judges to consider possibly running for election. Now, we can't be politically active, but we can share our stories. And frankly, that's what we're going to do. And I'm very proud of that. And I think it's been a very significant progress in the last year. And I think that by the end of this year, we're going to have a membership of over 200 people. I firmly believe that. Okay, so.
Thank you, Justice. And Nadia, closing us out on allyship. I feel like perhaps for you it's maybe even more vital because that's you need that in order to survive. You need people understanding what the people you serve are going through and what your business is trying to do. And I imagine our community is not your sole source of support for that. So to someone hopefully watching online at some point in the future, what would you tell them for how they can support our community in moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, first, allyship is a verb. It's an action. It's what are you doing? We've also gotten to a point in this dialogue as a society that we need people to step up and do the work themselves, hold each other accountable. The amount of times that I am misgendered and no one steps in and corrects the other person, even though I know they know, and then you're exhausted, right? And you're like, I don't do it. I don't want to make it weird, yada, yada, yada. And then that's just keeps this thing going where it's like, say it out loud. Just be like, they. he, she, do those things. Push through the discomfort that you might have in any aspect of this work, because also remember the people who are standing in front of you, who are trans, who are queer, are pushing through so much discomfort to be able to show up in court that day, to try and be respectful while being disrespected. Like the little bit of discomfort you might feel to just be trying to do the right thing is nothing compared to what the person standing in front of you is feeling. And so remember that. And when you have to think about, when you're like, I don't know what decision to make, I don't know how to solve this, I don't feel like I'm confident in my ability to make a decision around this trans issue, take out trans and put in racism, take out trans and put in xenophobia. How would you handle it if it was one of those other isms, and take it just as seriously? And that answer will probably be as close to right as it can be. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you all. Charlie Arrowood with the Phala Commission, Judge Norma Jennings, New York County Housing Court, Judge Matthew Parker Rasso of Bronx County Civil Court, Nadia Swanson, the Ali Forney Center, and Justice Jim Heyer, Supreme Court, Westchester County. Thank you all so much for being a part of this.
And thank you, Alan, for doing such a wonderful job moderating this very important spotlight on moving justice forward. We look forward to seeing you all in September, October, and continuing when we continue our initiative. So on behalf of the presiding justice, thank you for coming out today, and we'll see you in the future.